What happens when a queen's final wishes are ignored? When centuries-old traditions are challenged and the future of the monarchy hangs in the balance, Queen Elizabeth's will was meant to be her last testament, a guide for the royal family's future. But behind palace doors, whispers of betrayal and power struggles have ignited a crisis. Will Prince Harry follow through on his ultimatum? Is Queen Camilla rewriting royal history? And will King Charles risk his reign to keep his family intact? Prince Harry had always known the weight of his last name, but this time the burden felt unbearable. For decades, royal wills had been sealed, locked away in private vaults, hidden from public scrutiny. Yet, whispers from the palace suggested that Queen Elizabeth's final wishes were far from ordinary. It wasn't just about wealth or tradition, it was about control. The decisions outlined in her will had reportedly shaken the monarchy to its core, and Prince Harry was at the heart of the storm. His grandmother had been the pillar of the royal family, the force that held it together even as scandals and controversies threatened to tear it apart. Now, in the wake of her passing, the royal family was left to navigate the aftermath of her final decisions, and for Harry, there was no room for compromise. If the Queen's will was ignored, if certain members of the family chose power over legacy, he would walk away for good. This wasn't just an empty threat, it was a warning, a final stand against a system he had spent his entire life trying to reconcile with. Inside Buckingham Palace, tension was at an all-time high. The will's contents had not been publicly disclosed, yet behind closed doors, heated discussions were taking place. One of the most contentious revelations centered around Balmoral Castle, the Queen's beloved retreat in Scotland. For generations, it had been passed down in a direct line from monarch to monarch. Everyone had assumed it would naturally go to King Charles. After all, that was the way things had always been, but the Queen had other plans. According to multiple reports, she had willed Balmoral to Prince William, bypassing Charles altogether. The decision left some members of the royal family stunned. Was this a sign that the Queen had seen William as the true future of the monarchy? Was it an intentional effort to limit Camilla's influence over royal assets? For Camilla, this was nothing short of an insult. She had spent years working to secure her place within the monarchy. Despite the shadow of Princess Diana, despite the public scrutiny, she had risen through the ranks, eventually being crowned as Queen Camilla. And now, she was expected to accept that her husband, the reigning king, had been overlooked in his mother's final wishes. Behind closed doors, private meetings were held. Advisors were brought in to assess the situation. Some urged Charles to follow the will as it was written, to respect his mother's decisions no matter how unexpected they might be. Others suggested that there might be ways to challenge the will, to reinterpret certain clauses in a way that would ensure Charles remained in control. For Prince William, the situation was delicate. Balmoral wasn't just an estate, it was a symbol of power within the royal family. If he accepted the inheritance, it could be seen as a direct challenge to his father's authority. If he refused, it could mean going against the Queen's final wishes. And then there was Harry. Unlike William, Harry had no interest in palace politics. But what he did care about was honoring the legacy of the one person who had always stood by him, his grandmother. For him, this wasn't about inheritance or royal protocol. It was about principle. If Charles and Camilla refused to follow the Queen's wishes, what else were they capable of? If they were willing to rewrite history for their own gain, then how could the public trust anything that came out of the monarchy? For years, Harry had tried to find a middle ground, balancing his role within the family with his desire for independence. But this time, there was no room for compromise. He had made his position clear. If Camilla chose to override the Queen's will, if Charles allowed it, he would sever all ties with the royal family. There would be no return, no second chances. And he meant it. The tension wasn't just limited to Balmoral. There were other unexpected changes in the Queen's will, changes that had left certain members of the family feeling betrayed. One of the biggest surprises was the redistribution of her personal jewelry collection. For years, it had been widely assumed that Catherine, the Princess of Wales, would inherit a significant portion of the Queen's jewelry. She was the future Queen consort, after all. Many of the pieces had been worn by generations of royal women, passed down from one monarch to the next. But when the details surfaced, Catherine was left disappointed. Some of the most valuable and historically significant pieces had reportedly been given to unexpected individuals. Some had been set aside for Princess Anne, some for other royal family members, and some had even vanished from public records entirely. Speculation quickly pointed to Camilla. Had she played a role in the redistribution of the Queen's jewelry? Had she ensured that certain pieces remained under her control? And if so, was this part of a larger plan to solidify her influence over the monarchy? The rumors spread like wildfire. Inside the palace, whispers of favoritism and hidden agendas grew louder. Some believed the Queen's wishes had been manipulated, that certain decisions had been made without her full consent. And once again, Harry was furious. For him, this was more than just an inheritance dispute. It was about trust. It was about respecting the legacy of a woman who had dedicated her entire life to serving the monarchy. If her final wishes could be ignored or twisted, then what did that say about the family he had once been part of? In the public eye, the monarchy projected an image of unity, but behind closed doors the cracks were impossible to ignore. Harry had spent years trying to make peace with his role within the royal family. He had tried to find common ground, even after stepping back from his official duties. But this was different. This wasn't just about him. This was about the Queen. And he refused to stay silent. His warnings weren't just directed at Charles and Camilla. They were directed at everyone who had a role in shaping the monarchy's future. If the Queen's will was manipulated, if the decisions she made in her final days were disregarded, then the monarchy would have no legitimacy left. Inside the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, where tradition clashed with modernity, the battle over Queen Elizabeth's last will had reached a boiling point. The whispers of inheritance disputes were no longer just rumors. They had evolved into full-scale conflicts within the royal family. Prince Harry had drawn his line in the sand, issuing an ultimatum that shocked both his supporters and critics. His demand was simple: follow the Queen's final wishes or risk losing him forever. Despite the intense public interest, the palace remained silent. Behind closed doors, however, tensions were mounting. King Charles found himself in an unenviable position, caught between his son's unwavering stance and the responsibilities of his new role as monarch. Tradition dictated that he respect his mother's will, but his wife, Queen Camilla, was not about to let go of what she believed was rightfully theirs. Camilla had spent decades shaping her place within the royal family. It had not been an easy journey. Public perception of her had shifted over the years, but deep down, she knew that many still compared her to Princess Diana. Now, as queen, she had finally secured her position at the heart of the monarchy. To some, she was a woman who had proven herself worthy. To others, she remained an outsider, someone whose influence should have never reached the throne. The idea that she would quietly accept the terms of Queen Elizabeth's will was far from reality. If Balmoral Castle was meant for King Charles, then that was how it should remain. If the jewelry distribution had been altered in a way that benefited certain family members over others, then perhaps there was a reason for that. Camilla was no stranger to palace politics, and if history had taught her anything, it was that nothing in the royal family was ever set in stone. Behind closed doors, arguments unfolded. Advisors debated the legal technicalities of royal wills. Could certain clauses be contested? Was there room for interpretation? The Crown's legal team explored every possibility, searching for a path that would allow Charles to retain full control without outright defying the Queen's wishes. The weight of the situation was unbearable for Prince William. As the direct heir to the throne, his every move was scrutinized. He was expected to be the bridge between the past and the future of the monarchy, the steady presence in times of crisis. But this time, even he struggled to maintain his composure. His grandmother's final decisions had been clear, yet there was pressure to let things be quietly adjusted for the sake of stability. He had never doubted his father's leadership. But this was different. Balmoral was more than just a residence. It was the place where the Queen had found solace in her final years. If she had truly intended for it to go to him rather than Charles, then that should be honored. But stepping forward to claim it would mean openly challenging his father and Camilla. For Prince Harry, the matter was more than just legal formalities and inheritance claims. It was about integrity. He had already distanced himself from the monarchy, choosing a life away from royal duties. But this time, it was not about stepping back. It was about standing up for what he believed was right. The monarchy, as it had always been, was based on image and power. But what good was power if it came at the cost of respect? Harry knew what the response would be. Many within the royal circle already viewed him as the outsider, the one who had turned his back on duty. But he did not see it that way. He had spent years fighting to carve his own path, and now, with the Queen gone, he felt the weight of responsibility to ensure that her legacy was not rewritten by those who had the most to gain. His relationship with William had always been complex. They had grown up as brothers, bonded by their shared loss of their mother, but time had created a divide between them. William had remained steadfast in his royal duties, prepared to take on the crown when the time came. Harry had taken another route, choosing independence over obligation. But now, for the first time in years, they found themselves on the same side of a battle. Inside the palace, the Queen's personal belongings were being catalogued, each item carefully recorded for historical preservation. Among them was a collection of jewelry that held deep sentimental value. Some of these pieces had belonged to Queen Mary, some had been passed down from Queen Victoria, and others were gifts from heads of state around the world. It was expected that these heirlooms would be distributed among the most senior members of the royal family. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had naturally assumed that she would inherit some of the most significant pieces as the future queen consort. But as the details were reviewed, it became evident that some of the most treasured items had gone elsewhere. The absence of certain pieces did not go unnoticed. Had they been given to Princess Anne? Were they locked away in a private collection? Or had Camilla taken possession of them before the official distribution? The lack of clarity fueled speculation. Camilla had never been one to wear extravagant pieces, preferring subtle elegance over grandeur. But she was now queen, and with that came certain privileges. Some royal experts speculated that she had chosen to retain specific pieces not out of personal preference, but as a strategic move to reinforce her position within the monarchy. Catherine had remained publicly composed, but those closest to her could sense the disappointment. These jewels were not just about status, they were about legacy. Every piece carried a story, a connection to the past. To be left out of the most significant distributions was not just unexpected, it was a statement. The public remained unaware of the full details, but the speculation had begun. Social media was flooded with discussions about the Queen's will, with royal watchers analyzing every rumor, every report. Some believed that this was nothing more than palace maneuvering, a standard redistribution of royal assets. Others saw it as a sign of deeper divisions within the family. For Harry, the jewelry debate was yet another reason to question the integrity of the process. His mother had faced battles within the royal family, and now he found himself in a similar position. Was history repeating itself? He had no interest in the jewels themselves, but the principle of the matter struck a nerve. Meanwhile, Charles found himself under increasing pressure. His reign was still in its early stages, and he could not afford a scandal. The public had accepted him as king, but there were those who still questioned whether he would ever live up to the legacy of his mother. The handling of her will was now a test of his leadership. The walls of Buckingham Palace had witnessed countless royal conflicts, but this was different. This was not just a disagreement over protocol or a quiet family matter that could be swept under the rug. The tension over Queen Elizabeth's last will had escalated to a breaking point, and with each passing day, the silence from the royal family only fueled the speculation. Prince Harry had made it clear, if Camilla refused to honor the Queen's final wishes, he would sever all ties with the monarchy. And this time, there would be no turning back. Inside the palace, meetings stretched late into the night. King Charles was under immense pressure, not only from his family, but also from senior advisors who understood the gravity of the situation. His reign was still new, and any sign of division within the monarchy could weaken his authority. He had spent a lifetime preparing for this role, waiting for the moment when he would finally take his mother's place as king. But now, in one of the first real tests of his leadership, he found himself trapped between tradition and personal loyalty. Camilla remained firm. She had fought too hard for her place in the monarchy to concede now. The Queen's will, in her view, had been written during a different time, under different circumstances. Things had changed. As queen, she believed she had the right to decide what was best for the future of the royal family, even if it meant making decisions that some might not agree with. But Harry was not about to let this go. He had spent years watching the inner workings of the monarchy, understanding how power was wielded and how narratives were controlled. He had seen how history could be rewritten to suit those in power, and he refused to let that happen now, not when it involved the final wishes of the grandmother he had loved and respected. The media had picked up on the growing unrest, and royal watchers dissected every public appearance, looking for signs of the unfolding drama. Reports emerged of heated discussions behind palace doors, of whispered arguments between family members. Some sources claimed that William was growing frustrated, caught between his loyalty to his father and the undeniable fact that Harry was making a valid point. Others suggested that certain members of the royal household were actively working to suppress further leaks about the will. Meanwhile, the controversy surrounding the Queen's jewelry continued to stir resentment. It was no secret that Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had expected to inherit some of the Queen's most iconic pieces. She had worn them on previous royal occasions, showcasing their legacy with elegance and grace. Yet, as the details emerged, it became clear that some of the most valuable heirlooms had not gone to her. Among the missing pieces was a sapphire and diamond brooch that had belonged to Queen Victoria, a piece that symbolized the long lineage of British queens. Another was a tiara worn by the Queen on multiple state visits, a piece believed to have been set aside for Catherine. But those pieces were now in question. Had they been quietly redistributed? Had Camilla taken possession of them? Or was there something even more complicated at play? The absence of transparency only fueled speculation. Some royal insiders insisted that the Queen had made these decisions herself, that she had wanted to recognize the contributions of other family members. Others believed that last-minute changes had been made and that Camilla had ensured certain items stayed within her personal collection. Catherine remained silent on the matter, at least publicly. She had always understood the nature of royal life, the expectations placed upon her, and the delicate balance she had to maintain. But those close to her knew that she was disappointed. This was not just about jewels. It was about what they represented. The Queen had carefully preserved these heirlooms, ensuring that they were passed down through generations, and now their fate was uncertain. Harry, on the other hand, had no reason to hold back. He saw the redistribution as further proof that the monarchy was prioritizing its own self-preservation over honoring the Queen's legacy. He knew how these decisions were made, how conversations happened behind closed doors, how influence was quietly exerted until the outcome was exactly as intended. For him, this was more than just an inheritance dispute. It was about accountability. It was about the monarchy acknowledging that even in death, the Queen's wishes should hold power. If her will could be altered, if her last requests could be ignored, then what did that say about the institution as a whole? The situation only worsened when reports surfaced suggesting that King Charles and Camilla were considering a reassessment of royal properties. Some sources claimed that Balmoral, despite being mentioned in the Queen's will, was being reconsidered as a shared royal residence rather than being passed solely to Prince William. If true, this would mean that Charles and Camilla intended to maintain their hold over the estate, despite what had been outlined in the will. For William, this was a test of loyalty. He had always stood by his father, preparing for the day when he would follow in his footsteps as king. But he could not ignore what was happening. If the Queen had truly intended for Balmoral to be his, then allowing that decision to be reversed would mean turning his back on her wishes. The problem was that speaking out meant going against his father, and for William, that was not an easy choice to make. He had seen the consequences of family division firsthand. He had watched as his relationship with Harry had fractured, how years of tension had led them down separate paths. Could he afford to challenge his father now? Or was there a way to navigate this without causing irreparable damage? Prince Harry had made it clear he would not tolerate any attempt to override the Queen's last will. His warning had sent ripples through the royal circle, forcing King Charles and Queen Camilla into an impossible situation. There was no easy solution. Either they honored the will in its entirety, risking shifts in power and perception, or they adjusted certain details to maintain the balance they believed was necessary. But altering the Queen's wishes was a dangerous game, one that threatened to permanently sever relationships within the family. Tensions between Harry and Camilla had reached a boiling point. Camilla had always been a divisive figure, and despite years of public rehabilitation, she remained a symbol of controversy. She had worked tirelessly to secure her place at Charles's side, but even in her most private moments, she must have known that she would never escape the shadow of the past. Now, as Queen, she held an unprecedented level of influence, and she had no intention of letting it slip away. Harry saw things differently. To him, Camilla represented everything he had fought against, a system that protected those in power at any cost, even if it meant rewriting history. If she refused to follow the Queen's last will, what else was she willing to compromise? He had long since abandoned any hope that the royal family could function as a true family, but this was something else entirely. This was betrayal, not just of him, but of the grandmother he had loved so deeply. King Charles found himself stuck in the middle. He had spent his entire life waiting for the throne, knowing that when the time came, he would be expected to lead with grace and wisdom. But leadership came with burdens he had not anticipated. His mother had ruled for 70 years, carrying the weight of the monarchy with unwavering devotion. Now, barely a year into his reign, he was facing a crisis that had the potential to define his legacy. The issue of Balmoral Castle remained unresolved. The Queen's will had reportedly stated that it was to be passed to Prince William, a move that surprised many within the family. The Scottish estate had always been one of the Queen's most cherished retreats, a place where she had found solace in the final years of her life. But its significance extended beyond sentiment. It was a symbol of royal tradition, a home that carried the weight of history. William had stayed silent on the matter for as long as possible, not wanting to escalate the situation any further. He had always been the one to maintain order, to put duty above personal conflict. But this time, things were different. If the Queen had indeed chosen to leave Balmoral to him, then ignoring her decision would feel like a rejection of her trust. And yet, stepping forward to claim it would mean challenging his father and Camilla, something he had spent his entire life avoiding. For Catherine, the ongoing dispute over the Queen's jewelry was just as troubling. She had always understood that royal traditions came with certain expectations, that things were never as straightforward as they seemed. But there were some lines that should not be crossed. The redistribution of the Queen's personal collection had been met with shock, especially when it became clear that certain pieces had not gone where they were expected to. The absence of key items, including tiaras and brooches that had been worn on some of the monarchy's most historic occasions, raised questions. Had the Queen changed her mind in her final days, or had someone intervened after her passing? Some believed that Camilla had quietly ensured that select pieces remained within her personal collection, while others speculated that an internal reshuffling had taken place to maintain a sense of balance. Either way, the lack of transparency only added to the growing mistrust within the family. Harry saw these events as part of a larger pattern. He had spent years watching the monarchy operate from the inside, understanding how power was quietly maneuvered behind closed doors. The royal family had always been careful to present a unified front, even when internal divisions ran deep. But this time, the divisions could no longer be ignored. His decision to walk away had been difficult, but it had been necessary. He had chosen a life outside the monarchy, one where he could raise his family free from the pressures that had defined his own childhood. But even from a distance, the pull of royal life had never truly left him. The Queen had been one of the few people within the institution who had always supported him, who had understood his desire for something different. To see her final wishes being questioned, manipulated, or ignored felt like the ultimate betrayal. The world was watching, waiting for the monarchy's next move. The palace had remained tight-lipped, refusing to issue any official statement on the matter. But silence only fueled speculation. Was Charles truly in control, or was Camilla taking the lead in shaping the monarchy's future? Had William and Catherine been sidelined in key decisions? And what role, if any, would Harry and Meghan play in the ongoing narrative? The royal family had faced many scandals over the years, but none had shaken its foundation quite like this. The Queen's last will had become more than just a document outlining the distribution of wealth and titles. It had exposed the very cracks in the monarchy that had long been hidden beneath its carefully maintained image. What should have been a solemn farewell to one of the longest-serving monarchs in British history had instead turned into a battle over power, influence, and control. For King Charles, the pressure had never been greater. He had ascended the throne knowing that his reign would be scrutinized more than any other. He was not his mother. He did not command the same unwavering public devotion that Queen Elizabeth had maintained throughout her 70-year reign. His leadership was constantly being tested, and now the fight over the will had become a defining moment for his rule. How he handled this situation would determine whether he was seen as a strong, fair king or a man who allowed personal interest to dictate the future of the monarchy. Queen Camilla had remained unwavering. She had spent years fighting for acceptance within the royal family, and now, with her title secured, she would not step back. If Balmoral Castle had been designated for Charles, then that was where it should remain. If the Queen's jewelry had been reassigned, then there must have been a reason. Her approach was clear. There was no room for sentimentality when it came to protecting the institution. She understood the power of tradition, but she also knew that tradition could be reshaped when necessary. Prince William had been silent for too long, and he knew it. He had spent his life preparing for the day when he would take the throne, learning to navigate the complex world of royal politics. But this was not a test of diplomacy. It was a test of his loyalty to the very foundation of the monarchy. The Queen had chosen to pass Balmoral to him, not out of favoritism, but because she believed it was the right decision for the future of the royal family. If he allowed this to be reversed, then what else could be changed? What other decisions could be quietly adjusted behind closed doors? He was torn between his duty to his father and his duty to his grandmother's legacy, and the weight of that choice was suffocating. Meanwhile, the public had grown restless. Speculation over the Queen's will had taken over news headlines, social media platforms, and discussions among royal watchers. Every decision made by the royal family was being analyzed, dissected, and questioned. Had certain members of the family secured more than what was originally intended? Was Camilla using her position to alter key aspects of the will? Was Charles allowing it to happen in an effort to keep his reign stable? The lack of transparency only fueled further mistrust. Prince Harry, however, had no doubts about where he stood. He had always been the one to challenge the monarchy, to step away from the carefully rehearsed royal traditions. But this time, his fight was not just about personal freedom. It was about respect. The Queen had made her decisions, and they should be honored. The idea that those in power could quietly reshape her will to serve their own interests was something he could not accept. If they were willing to manipulate something as sacred as a last will, then what did that say about the way the monarchy functioned as a whole? His ultimatum had been clear. If Camilla refused to honor the Queen's wishes, he would cut all ties with the royal family. This was not just a symbolic statement, it was a permanent decision. He had already stepped back from his royal duties, but this would mean severing every remaining connection. No more diplomatic attempts to bridge the gap. No more opportunities for reconciliation. If the Queen's will was disregarded, then the monarchy had already chosen its path, and it was one that he wanted no part of. The question now was whether Charles would act. The palace had remained silent for weeks, hoping that the situation would resolve itself without further escalation. But silence was no longer an option. The pressure was mounting from all sides. Advisors, the press, and the public were demanding answers. Charles had to make a choice. Would he step forward as a leader who honored his mother's final decisions, even at the cost of internal division? Or would he allow Camilla to take control, risking the public's perception of his reign in the process? As the days passed, it became clear that the palace was preparing for an announcement. Royal insiders hinted that a decision had been made, though the details remained undisclosed. Some believed that Charles had finally decided to uphold the Queen's will, ensuring that Balmoral would go to William as intended, and that any questionable redistributions of jewelry would be corrected. Others speculated that a compromise had been reached, one that would maintain the appearance of respecting the Queen's wishes while allowing certain adjustments behind the scenes. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come that far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.